Welcome back to another drawing video. I hope you have your sketchbooks ready since we will be practicing portraits. In this sketchbook session, I'll show you how I practice portraits lately, learn more about the structures of a face so that I can understand it, not just copy it, using the Asaro Head, and I go back to just basics with my sketchbooks and simple pencils. But let's start from the beginning. I have this tiny sketchbook that turned from a place intended for random doodles into one of my favorite projects from last year. In it, I'm practicing portraits, but with a focus on light and shadow rather than lines and proportions. I use movie scenes as references, as the cinematographers have created beautiful light setups for me to learn from. If you're practicing proportions or if you're diving into portraits for the very first time, I would recommend less dramatic lighting, using real-life models, be it life drawing classes or just sketching your friends, or more clearly lit natural photos. I take the sketchbook with me wherever I go and try to draw a couple of scenes at least each month. Here, inspired by the dark interior and retro decor of the cafe, I picked a scene from In the Mood for Love by Wong Kar-wai, an old favorite movie of mine. It plays with out-of-focus figures a lot, and the movies are worth studying for the costuming alone, beyond the gorgeous cinematography. You can see how I'm searching for shadows. I try to disconnect from what I know a face looks like and to instead look for the abstract. This is also a great warm-up exercise if you ever feel like your drawings are turning out stiff. For sketching expressive shadows, softer pencils are a good choice. We don't want to get lost in details or over-render facial features, but create textures and darkness. I mostly go for 3B pencils and my favorite Blackwing matte. I couldn't finish the sketch that day before meeting a friend, but added final touches much later at home. And there a particular feature stuck out to me: the cheekbones. On the left they are emphasized by a highlight, while on the right side of the drawing they create this beautiful shadow shape, with the entire jawline melting into the dark. Stuff like this always makes me want to learn more, to study what I see so that I can bring it to life in my own paintings. Here I'm practicing with paintings in mind. How does a figure, a portrait, fit into a scene? How do we guide the eye of the viewer? Where is the contrast greatest? Where are the edges blurry? It all depends on your specific goals for practice at the moment. Or what's most fun, and I happen to really love making these. This movie scene sketch is one of the Patreon prints for April. There's a second watercolor print that I will reveal next week, but I really like the atmosphere of all the shadows and textures of this one, so I added it to my existing collection of prints here. There's something about the simplicity of just pencil and paper that I love and always come back to. I've posted a short video about my simplified approach to the Loomis portrait drawing method in the past. I recommend you give that a look for the proportions of a human head, as right here we'll dive into the Asaro head. That model, with its two different halves, one more intricate than the other, can look quite intimidating, as if I could get lost in all the planes and angles. The Asaro head is very interesting to me. Something about the angular features tickles my aesthetic senses, and I think understanding the planes of this model would be incredibly helpful when painting. Since I focused on the cheek and jaw, I used a lot of angled shots and focused less on symmetry. You might prefer a different view if you're studying another part of the face. My goal here isn't to learn the Asaro head by heart, or anything like that. Just as I don't follow the Loomis method step by step whenever I sketch a portrait. But I believe that the more tools we have in our artist toolbox, the better. Taking this different approach focused on planes instead of lines might give me a different understanding or help me see portraits with new eyes. And maybe it will help you too. Now, my actual approach to studying is pretty simple. I really just practice art like I'd approach any other subject. Repetition, taking notes, and trying to see if I remember what I just drew. I'd previously studied the nose and mouth with a Skillshare class, not sponsored here, I just kept going after that video. So here I'm trying to put it all together. The Asaro head comes with two halves. A detailed and less detailed model of the head. My interest in the cheek is what led me to use the more detailed one, but if you just want to take a look at if the Asaro head works for your drawing process, the simpler half is perfect for that. I think it's especially helpful when finding those turning points from light to shadow on a face, no matter where you place your light source. Knowing which planes of the head are angled downwards or upwards can make that process so much easier. All of these individual parts need to come together if I want them to be useful. So I sketched a quick John Wick movie scene study to see if I could apply all of these angles and planes and make sense of them. I quickly learned during both this little sketch and the ones that follow that the Asaro head is not about capturing a likeness. That relies on close observation, on measuring and careful build-up. What it is great for is the journey, not the result. In trying to find those key points from the Asaro head on my portrait sketches, I could see them with new eyes and understand them better. Especially for the no man's land of the side of the face, the area in which we don't have any facial features like eyes or nose or mouth. The Asaro head gave me a much better understanding by breaking it down into these individual shapes. Of course, we don't have to measure out these exact triangles and rectangles that you can see on the model. Every face is different. If you've ever practiced vocabulary for a foreign language, but you finally remembered everything, only to then come back to it 3 days later and having forgotten a large portion, well, it's the same here. Just because I studied the planes of a nose once doesn't mean I'll then always remember it, so I do have to kind of go back over these again. I try to make these study sketches with future Evie in mind, with enough information that future me can flip back to this page and refresh her memory. So I add little notes and use colored pencils to clarify important shapes. This might look very dry and boring, but honestly, I enjoy stuff like this quite a lot. I love learning more about drawing, making connections I hadn't seen before, and it makes me excited to apply what I've learned later. I came back to my In the Mood for Love movie scene studies for a larger Asaro Head practice portrait. But I mixed it up a bit. I started with a more Loomis-like approach, measuring the face in thirds and with the typical center line of the face. I didn't concern myself much with the actual likeness, though. I just wanted to see if I could find these direction changes the Asaro Head simplified for us. And it actually lined up pretty well. Of course, the proportions are different, the nose sitting lower, the face being overall less angular, but I could see where a plane of the face turned away, or upwards, or downwards, and found it really interesting to discover all of these features. My reference picture was actually incredibly low resolution, just a screenshot on my phone, and so the Asaro Head helped me invent details and shading. I followed the planes when shading to both help myself understand the direction of each of these planes in relation to the camera and to me, and to create a sense of depth. While I was worried that this would just be overwhelming and complicated, I really enjoyed this drawing process. I kept looking over at my previous sketches as if they were study notes, but also to let go of the reference as the drawing gained more internal logic. I used 3D models of the Asaro Head that you can move around and arrange light sources for. While I'd love to have the actual real-life buzz, it's not exactly cheap, understandably, so I'm making do with just pictures. Have you been practicing anything new lately? I really love filming these kind of all over the place sketchbook sessions, documenting what I learn, even if it's just a couple head diagrams and a couple portraits, like here. Practicing art isn't glamorous, the results aren't always pretty, and really they don't have to be. And it feels good to share that part of my practice instead of just real paintings. So here you can see what an afternoon of studying the Asaro Head looked like for me. Hedwig wants to join. And one thing I really quickly realized is this isn't to measure out a head. The dark shadow over here is Hedwig's butt. With the Loomis head you can measure out proportions from like the thirds that make up the hairline, the eyes, the nose, and then the chin. The separations down the middle, all of that you can kind of build up step by step. So what I feel is different about the Asaro Head is that it gives you additional information that you might not be able to see even if you have a live model or a good photograph to look at, that you then can understand and might influence your shading technique, your brushwork, your subtle color changes. It gives you information about changes in direction in areas that in most cases are either just brightly lit or deeply in shadow, and you don't actually see that information with your naked eye, but knowing that it is there might help you with your drawings. At least I feel like it helps me so far. I found myself doing a kind of back and forth, a combined approach of looking at my reference and looking at my Asaro models and sketches, trying to see in more detail where these shapes are lying. And I found it especially helpful for the kind of no man's land that is this entire cheek, temple, jawline area. Are we walking through here? Her nose is shaped differently than the very distinct Asaro model, but all the individual planes are there, all the same. Her cheeks are shaped differently, but I can still use the information from the Asaro head to figure out where the shadows would begin. What the Asaro head mostly does is kind of summarize the information you can get from skull studies and muscle studies, especially around the mouth. Last night I actually started some quick sketches in this craft sketchbook. I bought this a while ago. It's by Hahnemuhle. I've been really liking their sketchbooks in general. This is also a Hahnemuhle notebook, travel note, I think they're called. I'll put it in the description because I really like these for small sketches and the paper is wonderful. And then of course there's my big D&S sketchbook. That's my probably most used sketchbook of the entire last year as well. There's no need to memorize each part. Here, I'm just trying to be more aware of these planes while looking at my reference. My own knowledge is very incomplete. You're seeing my studying process, after all. But I actually felt the difference for all the sketches and paintings I created since this one study session here. I showed those craft paper gouache portraits earlier in the video. I've been a bit obsessed with them, and the Asaro head as a guide came in very helpful for all of them. I'll be showing my gouache portrait painting process for one of those next, if anyone's interested. I think the Asaro head model actually shines the most when used with a painterly approach. As I mentioned though, it's just a tool in our artistic toolbox. As I focused so much on how the plane changes worked and what that means for my shading, I lost sight of the actual likeness. For that we have other tools. And actually finding abstract shadow shapes, like in my very first sketch from the very beginning of this video, is one of those. Since I was interested in that cheekbone and jawline from the movie study, that's where I kept my focus. It can be really helpful if you have a concrete goal for a study session, as going in without aim can be a bit overwhelming. On the other hand, if you just want to sit down and doodle some portraits while looking at an Asaro head model or a Loomis head method, or something completely different, that's also valid. And to be honest, most of my studies happen like that. Maybe even while watching a movie or show and being a bit distracted. Here I wrapped up my larger practice portrait. Again, not a great likeness, but I loved the shading process, and it confirmed that, for me, the Asaro Head is about the journey, about understanding what I see, examining and taking apart a character or portrait instead of just copying, and it's less about the final destination. I hope you enjoyed this practice session and that you maybe even took out your own sketchbook to draw a few portraits today. If you're interested in the Asaro Head, I've linked some of the resources I used in the video description. And I'll definitely come back to it in future videos, for paintings and sketches alike. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you again in my next art video.